This is the first interview you've given since this all blew up. So let's just cut to the quick here. When Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, says that Boris Johnson tried to get him to effectively circumnavigate the rules about the honours, including yours, is he telling the truth?
So he's using something which I think they call sophistry, which is using a language and words in order to deceive. What Boris Johnson actually asked him to do was to ask HOLAC to do the re-vetting which required to be done MPs. Now, can I just explain why that's important? So every 6 months, a re-vetting has to take place.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's make this easy for the viewers who aren't up to speed on all the nuances. Yeah. Let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson tells you when that he's intending to make you a baroness. When does he have that first conversation?
Oh, that was ages ago. That was back in the autumn sometime. It was a private conversation. You're not allowed to talk about it afterwards. It was a private conversation to say that I'd been put on his resignation honours list.
To be a baroness?
Yeah, that's what it is when you go into the Lords.
OK, and what was your reaction to that? How did you feel about that?
It was quite emotional, actually, because I never... I've always revered the House of Lords. I think it's actually a place where... I know a lot of people criticise it and make fun of it almost, but it's a place where all the heavy lifting of the scrutiny of bills actually takes place. The Commons has become this set-piece theatre for Prime Minister's questions and for other big pieces, but actually where all the heavy lifting, where it's stuffed full of people with expertise and wisdom and knowledge, it's the Lords. And so it's a kind of place you look at...
I mean, there are a lot of old useless duffers there as well.
There may possibly be, but I couldn't comment. But there's also a lot of really serious heavy lifting goes on there, and it is a place that God, no, from my background, no one would ever have dreamt that someone from my background could get.
I mean, people who don't know your background, why do you say that?
So I was born in a place called Breck Road in Liverpool, which I think is probably classified as one of the poorest streets in the country, not just in Liverpool, one of the poorest wards. And, it was most of my life, the first almost 30 years of my life were very tough. It was, financially very, very hard. It sounds like something out of a Dickens novel, but I literally had to borrow shoes to go to school. I literally know what hunger pains feel like. And, I was born a long time ago. I was born in 57. The 60s went great for, in the early 70s for surviving. And there wasn't a benefit system or, the safety net that there is today for people. So it was pretty tough. And to think that, I didn't even know what a university was. I didn't know that universities even existed. It was just something that the House of Lords, I wouldn't have known. If you'd asked me at 21, do you know what the House of Lords is? I wouldn't even have known what it was. So to be told that you're being put on a list, to be nominated to go into the House of Lords, it's just it's unbelievable. And for me, it's so important because I did this a lot when I was Secretary of State in DCMS. It was all about making sure that ladders were put down into those backgrounds to give people opportunities to work in the arts and culture because they don't now. Because the kind of people who do work in arts and culture are those that went to independent school or, whose dad's a producer or whatever. So for me, it was that's the next stage, If I go into the Lords, it actually sends a signal to other people. Doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what you're born to, doesn't matter how poor you are, if you can get there. I call it the class ceiling or the class ceiling where I come from. I wanted to break that ceiling.
OK, so it means a lot to you.
Yeah, huge.
Clearly, I can tell that, right? It means a lot to you. But I would imagine serving your constituents as a Member of Parliament also means a lot to you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the great honours that anyone can have in this country, to be an elected official representing your constituents. So that then will obviously be an inevitable question to come. But from that moment Boris Johnson tells you that's his intention, do you just assume it's going to happen?
So what I thought was, I expected someone to contact me and talk to me. I thought it might be HOLAC, who's the House of Lords.
What's the normal procedure?
So this is why there is no normal procedure. I couldn't find this out. The normal procedure I've discovered is that HOLAC...
So who is HOLAC?
House of Lords Appointment Commission.
Right, so they had the right to approve or disapprove?
No, they have no right to approve or disapprove. So this rhetoric which has been coming out of Downing Street is that the House of Lords did not approve it. It's absolutely nonsense. They don't have that. It's not their mandate. So Boris's list goes into number 10. Number 10, hand it over to HOLAC. HOLAC do the vetting, that's police checks and HMRC checks. Then they hand that list back to number 10. Number 10 then hand that list over to the King. So what happened was Holak said to Number 10, this MP needs to make a public announcement that she will stand down within 6 months of being put back to you on this list. Nobody from Number 10 communicated that to me. Boris found out about this and had a meeting with Rishi last week. 6 months had elapsed since the vetting had been done. Why Downing Street waited 6 months, I've no idea. 6 months elapsed. Boris said to Rishi Sunak, you just need to ask for the re-vetting, which would take a matter of days. Rishi used very weasel words. He said to Boris Johnson, and that's the only thing Boris asked him to do. He said to Boris, whatever list Holak sent back to me, I will sign off. Boris left that meeting with the impression that James Forsyth, who is Sunak's political secretary, was going to ask for the re-vetting, for the list to come forward, and then Rishi would sign it off. But of course, Rishi was using those words because he knew a situation had been engineered, i.e. the information Holak had given had not been communicated to me, and therefore my name would not be on the list because I hadn't done what Holak asked Number 10 to ask me to do because nobody had asked me to do it.
Holak have let it be known that they did not support some of the people put forward.
So they couldn't, because they couldn't support the people who'd been put forward because we hadn't done what had been asked of us.
But that's the only reason that they wouldn't support it. It wasn't a failure of any of the vetting.
No, absolutely not, no.
Right, so who do you...
There were 6 people on this list.
This sounds like a sort of murder mystery plot that you'd have at a friend's dinner party. Who's the murderer here? Who has stopped you, Nadine Dorries, from joining the House of Lords, do you believe?
The Prime Minister.
Rishi Sunak?
Rishi Sunak.
You think he personally intervened?
Well, so very cleverly, of course, not his political secretary, James Forsyth, would do the heavy lifting, the not passing the message on, not doing what Holak asked. It was James Forsyth, but obviously James Forsyth works. But, I mean, James Forsyth is Rishi Sunak's best friend. He was his best man at his
but you're saying that Number 10 directly intervened to stop you...
What they did...
joining the House of Lords.
What they did...
That's what you're saying, though, right?
Yeah, what they did was not pass on the information from Holak, which was... she has to announce that she will stand down within 6, because you cannot be an MP and sit in the House. You can't be in two houses. You can't be in 2 legislatures.
Did you not know that rule?
Yes, I knew, but what we'd been told via back channels was that don't cause a by-election, there will be a solution, something's going to be found. That's what I was being told via the Cabinet Secretary and back channels.
So
that's what
the Cabinet Secretary said to you it was all going to be fine?
The Cabinet Secretary came up with a plan originally with another Cabinet Secretary that there would be a system that was put in place for Ruth Davidson, an asterisk system, which meant we could go on the list and we would stay there until a general election. We found out that suddenly that wasn't allowed, and then that's when I began to get suspicious, started asking questions, was met with a wall of silence, and then Boris Johnson also began to think something's not quite right here. That's why he asked the meeting with Rishi Sunak. Number 10, I know why they did this. They did this because they wanted to avoid a by-election. If they'd worked with me, we could have had this by-election at a time which was suitable to them, maybe after the autumn statements come out when hopefully there'll be some good news. We could have worked together, but instead... Did
Rishi Sunak lie to Boris...
put up a wall of silence,
OK, I get it. But
and stopped it happening.
Did Rishi Sunak lie to Boris Johnson in their meeting?
So what I've said to you is he used sophistry, some very clever words. I will sign off whatever list Holak give to me, knowing full well that my name was not, and mine and other names were not on that list because they had engineered that those names were not on that list by not informing us the request made by Holak to Number 10, informing us what we needed to do.
Are you
to be on the
sure
list.
Boris Johnson didn't take you off that list?
100%.
It wouldn't be the first time he's stiffed people.
No, I don't think that's true.
Well, it is true.
Well, I don't believe it is. I can only speak as my experience of Boris Johnson and those I know, and it's a very positive experience.
You're certain that he wouldn't have taken you off the list?
Absolutely certain. Absolutely certain.
Boris, I mean, for want of a better phrase, threw his toys out of the pram after all this happened. Some say you did too. You appeared on TalkTV.
No, I didn't.
Well, I'm going to play you a clip from TalkTV. This is before the news breaks. This is what you said to Mike Graham.
The last thing I would want to do would be to cause a by-election. Something significant did happen to change my mind, and I did do, and I think it's for the best.
And literally hours later, you quit and provoke
because
a by-election?
something significant did happen. And that there were two significant things that happened. The first was that I realised via a number of conversations what had happened. And the reason why I realised what had happened was a phone call was made to Simon Case on Thursday evening, and he was told, no, to an aide at Boris's office.
The cabinet
He was told, no, everything's fine, her name's on the list. Boris phoned the next morning, I phoned the next morning. We were told, I spoke to the chief whip. Shortly, actually.
So Thursday, the cabinet secretary confirms your name is on the list.
With an aide from Boris's office.
So what could have happened between...
Well, I'm just about to tell you.
OK.
So I spoke to the chief whip in the morning, and he said, no, everything's fine. On Friday morning, the list was announced at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I spoke to the chief whip on Friday morning. He said, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. He said, let me go make some inquiries and I'll get back to you. He got back to me 30 minutes before the list was published and said, actually, you're not on the list. 30 minutes before it was published.
And you found out from a journalist?
I found out from Steve Swinford from The Times on Thursday night, and I didn't believe him. I thought he was lying to me. And I was cross with him. I said, Steve, why are you doing this? You know, and I thought to myself, why isn't he just finding out the evidence for this story properly? Someone is doing this to wind him up.
You think the motivation for what Downing Street, you believe, did in stopping you getting this honour is that they didn't want to trigger a by-election, which is pretty ironic, given it's actually triggered 3 by-elections.
It's pretty stupid, actually. Not ironic. It was pretty stupid. If they thought they were being clever and avoiding by-elections...
But they deny all this.
By thinking that they could play... Well, of course they're going to deny it.
Well, are they lying?
They are not telling the truth.
So they're lying?
Well, they're not telling the truth. They're not telling the truth.
But the Prime Minister said...
There were 2 points.
The Prime Minister said he's going to bring integrity back to public life in
He's certainly not doing that. He's certainly not doing that.
But
and, you know...
Do you believe Rishi Sunak is lying about this?
So there are 3 points. There are 3 issues that Number 10 have lied on. They've lied on the fact that they denied the meeting with Boris Johnson even took place to begin. They denied to journalists and then accepted they had to acknowledge the meeting did take place. Then they lied and said that we were on the list and everything was absolutely fine. They gave the impression to Boris Johnson that they were going to ask for the revetting and that my name and others would be on the list and it would be signed off. The lies were told in a number of ways. And what I don't understand is the stupidity of it. And I've written about this in my column on the Daily Mail tomorrow. I put a timeline down about what actually happened. What I don't understand is the stupidity of this and the psychodrama creation of it. And the one point I would make is, you know, there were lots of criticisms about what happened under Boris Johnson, about the dramas that are compared to Number 10. Well, here's another one under Rishi Sunak. And the entire time that the dramas were occurring in Number 10, while Rishi Sunak was Number 2, working cheek by jowl with Boris Johnson.
Let me ask you...
We have another one.
Let me ask you on a wider point. Should somebody who's been Prime Minister and has had to be forced out of office in disgrace, you may or may not agree with why, but that was the reality, should they be entitled to have a resignation honours list? Many people, I'm one of them, think that any Prime Minister who has to quit in dishonourable circumstances should abrogate the right to have an honours list. I'm not passing judgment on you getting one or any others, right? I'm just saying I don't think that that is good for the system.
So, you know, if there had been a shred of evidence to justify the findings of the Privileges Committee against Boris Johnson, if they had... Well,
there is a shred. There's more than a shred.
No, there isn't, Piers. There is not a shred of evidence.
So a Privileges Committee, hang on, which has 7 people on it, 4 of whom are Eurosceptic, Brexit-supporting Conservatives. You're saying they set out to destroy Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister who won a big majority and delivered Brexit. You think that that's a realistic scenario?
No, I think that's a very simplistic scenario that you've presented.
Because it's a fact.
Because it isn't actually, because what takes place is that committee, it's under scrutiny, under a huge amount of public scrutiny. There are many events that have taken place that have been wrong with that committee. For example, the submissions by Sue Gray, who we just happened to know was working with Labour at the time, who we just happened to know employed a QC.
Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson
supporter.
Indisputably attended parties in Number 10, breaking his own rules.
He did not.
That's why the Privileges Committee made the conclusions it's made, which clearly, when Boris read them, he decided was so bad he had to quit immediately.
Piers, I regard the police as a higher authority.
They fined him.
They fined him and Rishi Sunak.
Right, but they fined Boris.
Rishi Sunak should be driven out of Parliament because he was fined as well.
Well, have you read this report by the Privileges Committee?
No, I haven't.
Right, so you don't know what it says.
So
You're convinced it's a stitch-up, but you haven't read it.
I know the facts. And
Well,
I
you
know
haven't read it.
the facts that they're working on.
No, you know what Boris told you.
If you're saying that
Boris
Johnson...
says and the word fact are two different things a lot of the time.
Well, again, we are never going to agree on that. But if...
Well, you think he always tells the truth?
If Boris Johnson has been driven out of Parliament for having sat at his desk and not eaten a piece of cake, when people he was working with all day in the same offices came into that room to wish him happy birthday, if you think that is the basis for driving him out of office...
I think it's more than that. I think it's more that there were the karaoke parties on the night before.
No, he wasn't.
It's his home.
No, it's not his home. He was in Chequers.
It's his home.
No, Piers. Well, so, again, let's correct a point there. It's Rishi who lives above number 10. Boris lived above number 11 next door. It was Rishi's home. It's Boris's office during the day, but it was actually Rishi's home.
Are you actually going to quit as an MP?
Yeah, I've resigned.
There's no way back. Some people think you may change your mind, that you were being a bit hot-headed.
No, so...
You haven't formally resigned yet.
You haven't let me explain to you the significant thing that happened to change my mind, to make me resign.
Go on.
It was the sheer audacity of the Chief Whip thinking that at my age, after having worked in Parliament for 21 years, serving 18 years on the backbenches, having been a minister during COVID and health, having been a Secretary of State, that he could dangle out to me some kind of stick and carrot, like be a good girl and we'll make sure something's sorted for you in the future, which is basically what he was saying to me. That, for me, at that moment, was what made me change my mind and made me make my decision to resign.
How upset are you at now not getting this honour you assumed you were going to get, not joining the House of Lords, not being Baroness at the end of all this?
Do you know what? I'm broken-hearted, not just for me, but for everybody who comes from a background like mine, who in today's world don't have the ability to climb ladders that they used to have years ago, who struggle to aspire because they feel that it just isn't worth being aspirational, it isn't worth working hard, because they see others from different backgrounds who take the spoils. And it kind of breaks my heart because that's what this story is. This story is about a girl from Breck Road in Liverpool who worked every day of her life since she was 14 years old, had something offered to her that people from that background don't get offered, removed by two privileged posh boys who went to Winchester and Oxford, and taken away duplicitously and cruelly, because they have known for months that it wasn't the case, and yet they let me and they let Boris Johnson continue to believe that was the case. It was upsetting, and it's upsetting for everybody who thinks that one day they could be that person, because do you know what? If you come up against someone like Rishi Sunak and James Forsyth from privileged backgrounds who have it all very easily given to them on a plate, you're in trouble. You won't make it, because they can do whatever they want to stop it.
There are a lot of people.
Exactly what's happening.
There are a lot of people who would say exactly the same about your mate Boris, that you won't get anyone who's been more privileged than him, or who went to Eton, who has glided effortlessly through life, trampling on people.
No money.
People say
he's on the bones of his backside most of his life. Who had no money.
I'm sure he's been on the bones of his backside most of his life.
Had no money. Went to Eton on a scholarship. Piers, you cannot make that comparison.
Here's what I say about Boris. I like him personally. Always have done, right? But I think the way he has run the country has been a disgrace, and that's why he's got his comeuppance. And when this report comes out, maybe even as soon as tomorrow, you will read it and you might be surprised about what they unearthed. It wasn't a witch hunt. It wasn't a stitch-up. Why would it be? 4 of the 7 on the committee are distinguished Conservatives who voted for Brexit.
I'll tell you why it would be, because one of the main contributors to that report was Sue Gray, who's now gone to work for Keir Starmer.
All right.
And who wants Boris gone out of Westminster more than Rishi Sunak? Keir Starmer does. We'll never agree on that.
OK, final question. Keir Starmer's the winner in all this. You handing him a by-election, which they will now probably gang up with the Lib Dems to win. Yeah. How does that help your party?
My party isn't helping itself.
No, but why are you knifing the party?
I'm not knifing the party.
In a way, you are.
No, Piers. I think you come to a point in life when you have to stop, when you can't just be pushed around, When you can't allow people to bully you, as I've just been bullied by number 10, you can't allow that to happen. You have to stand up for yourself. And that's what I did. It's a painful decision. I did not, when I said to Mike in the morning, I did not want to cause a by-election. I've loved serving. It's been the greatest honour of my life to serve Mid Bedfordshire for 18 years. Leaving it in the lurch like this to go through this by-election was not what I wanted. You said a moment ago about what an honour it is. When my majority was 24,600, when those people, 38,000 people went out and voted for me at the last election. Those people went out and put their cross next to my name. That is the biggest
And they'll all be watching.
Anyone
And they'll be watching
this
this thinking, well, why have you abandoned this?
I think they'll understand.
Really?
And, yeah, I think they'll understand, and I think they'll think we wouldn't let anyone do that to us either.
Nadine, thank you for coming in. I appreciate it.